Welcome to the Hay Kings podcast, brought to you by Vermeer, your expert in hay and forage equipment. Today we're joined again by Andrew Liemgruber. Andrew's family has gone through the hardest of hard things in agriculture, transition planning and estate planning. Andrew, where do we start on transition planning?
My dad is extremely progressive on, the whole legacy thing, and we're big in the Farm Bureau. We're both county board of directors, and he's big in the California Farm Bureau.
Oh, cool.
So my dad, I worked away from the farm for my first years out of college, working for a vegetable dehydration company. My dad, was taught that, kids got to get away from the farm before they come back for a little while. And then also, we've done a lot of estate planning and legacy planning, and, we kind of, trying to keep the farm going for the fifth generation that I'm now raising. So if you ever need advice on any additional topics,
I'm guessing you've heard all the podcast episodes I've released so far. That is one of the themes that I'm trying to capture here, is that legacy component. And then how do you keep that going?
That's a tough subject. And it really, having a dad that's, my dad's goals from the get-go were to build a big enough ranch for, I have two siblings, so for the three kids, and we've already split the land into individual LLCs, landholding companies that the farm rents, and so that's a good way to separate the land, and it kind of gives a little bit of protection from what we found with neighboring farms, that the siblings and children can get along great, but then you start introducing in-laws, with new spouses, and what do the kids think? And back to my grandfather, he always made it, that children and parents could go into business together, but never siblings. That you had to split it there, because otherwise it was going to be divided later. And the importance of doing things like that. And then we kind of had a big scare during the Obama presidency, when they were talking about moving the estate tax exemption from 5.5 down to 1.5.
Right.
So literally that year, we were in a state lawyer's office signing papers, literally like on New Year's Eve, just transferring things. But you got to be real careful doing that, because you want the step down basis. You don't want all the property to get reevaluated so that you have new higher property tax, and it's going to vary from state to state, but it's amazing that if there's no communication and you're not up front, it just then lawyers end up owning the farm, and the government ends up taking their big chunk. And so many of these farms they're not cash rich. They may have a lot of assets, but so when you start getting these inheritance taxes that come and take a big cut or a swipe out, then all of a sudden you have to sell farm ground to pay the taxes. And then when you sell the farm ground, now maybe the size of the farm is not sustainable anymore. Because and then, just general things on if farming's your primary business, that if you're not growing, if you're not, some people are against it, but I believe if you don't have some kind of a debt load or an operating line, if you're not continuing to expand and grow, then you're dying. So, there's no such thing as stagnant. You're either growing or you're receding. There's no status quo. So if you're not continuing to expand, then you're slowly dying.
Now, there's a couple of really key thought processes that you just went through there. You're talking about maintaining the farming operation through the generations.
Right.
And one of the ways that you're doing that is being active in your legal structures and your operating structures, and active in the conversations around that transition planning.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's only two things guaranteed in life, and that's death and taxes. So why wouldn't you plan? If you don't want your farm to continue, then don't plan. But if you want something to be established, and then there's the whole, you have passive members and you have active members, and that's a whole nother You have children that are involved in the farm and working, and then you have those that just aren't. And you have to, you can't, not everyone can be, it can't be equal, because life's not fair. Equal seems fair, but equal is not equal in reality. So if you have one kid that goes off to be a doctor and one kid that's operating the farm, you can't give an equal distribution, because that'll kill the farm. The farm has to maintain the cash flow, so while a parent, a farm owner, has to make those difficult decisions. And there's different ways to structure it. You can have payment schedules, or rent to own, or different things to try to make that fair. But if it's not discussed while the previous generation who's operating it is still alive, then it's going to be a big issue. But it takes a lot of faith and understanding too from the previous generation. They have to have faith in the next generation. When my dad set up those LLCs with the land, I mean, essentially he's giving while he's still working and alive. He's passing off ownership to his children, while he's still, relying on that farm to generate income for himself. But, you have to, and there's ways to set up the LLCs where you could still be the manager and have controlling rights, and you still control where the assets and the income goes. But, that's, I feel very fortunate that my dad is so forward thinking on stuff like that. And I know a lot of other farmers, they don't even, their family can be, well in years, and they haven't even discussed it. And that's not a strategy at all.
That is tremendous advice.
And there's resources out there. I mean, your farm bureaus, especially, for people in some of the smaller agricultural states, go lean on some of the big states. Go reach out to the resources of the Californias and the Texas and Florida and these big states with huge farm bureau ag programs. And they have seminars, they have courses, about estate planning, about, how to pass the farm along. And it's going to look different for every farm based on different sizes and different, I mean, we've seen our farm ground, because of a lot of it is water speculation and metropolitan and all these people coming up and buying land. I mean, my dad was buying farm ground 10 years ago for $3,000 an acre. Now I just bought a couple of fields and it's upwards of $15,000 an acre. And when the ground is that expensive, when you go to pass it on, you have so much in liabilities and assets. There's no way to a non-business owner, to just the general public, it looks like, well, you don't have money problems. You're worth millions. No. I've got millions in debt. This is my cash flow. These are my margins. I have to own this ground or lease this ground in order to generate this amount of cash flow. If I don't own the assets, I can't make the cash flow. And the problem is, well, you can't just sell the assets, because then your cash flow diminishes. Now your workforce and your equipment and all those things are less efficient, and less, maybe you can't justify that bell wagon or that, GPS auto steer 21-foot header swather. I mean, you have to maintain, like you were discussing earlier, a certain amount of acreage to justify these equipment upgrades. And, it's tough. And in our area, there's a lot of farmers that just lease, that rent. Mm-hmm. And I know that's common everywhere. And it's much, the cost per acre to rent in our area is $300 to $500 per acre. The cost to purchase and own is $800 to $1,000 per acre. So
You're talking on an annual basis.
on an annual basis, correct? Right. So if we almost have to lease ground to offset our ground that we're trying to purchase, because otherwise our margins would be so out of bounds that we would be non-sustainable. But they're the benefits of purchasing that ground is that's a legacy thing. I'm going to spend the next 25 to 30 years paying that ground off, but then hopefully it's all in the betterment of the next generation. My dad's doing a little bit better than his dad did, and hopefully I'll do a little better than my dad did, and so on, and we can increase and grow the farm. And, if you look at the rate of returns on purchasing farm ground, it's not good. Any investor would tell you you're crazy. I mean, I think it's like 1% to 2% returns. But in the long, and that's an annual basis. I mean, so you could take that money and invest it in the stock market and have way better returns. But you're also purchasing land for your business that will continue to be there. And it's your retirement plan. If I can work for 25 years, pay the ground off, and then it's an owned asset. If my kids choose to farm, they can rent it from me, or I can rent it to someone else if they choose to go on and do other things. And the rental income off of that owned ground that's your retirement plan. So, but yeah, we could go on for days talking about the legacy issue, and maybe we'll have to do another call on that. So
let's take a break there and we'll get a word from our sponsor.
I'm Danny Wan, and I switched to the Vermeer 604R because I believe this baler is built to last. I bale about 4,000 bales a year, and I think as much money you give for a baler, if they need to bale 4,000 bales a year, even if it's for 10 years, they need to get it done. The day I ran it, we absolutely had no issues at all. It fired up, and I baled like some guy. It just baled all day long.
Hear the full story at makinghay.com/haykings.
The conversation I just had with a cattle guy out of Canada, he's 40-ish, I think. He's a little older than I am. I just turned 30. And he's talking about these same legacy things. But he works off farm, or rather, I'm guessing he works from home, but his off-farm income is a pork company. Ham's Marketing is what it is. So he works for a marketing cooperative of pork producers. So all these independent pork producers call him up and he makes the trades for them, right? And he's a cattle producer and a hay guy and all that kind of stuff, right? We got to talking about how those risk management strategies allow producers to keep that legacy going. And I think so many producers want to do it the way Dad and Grandpa did it. They just want to drive tractor and they want to fix things and they want to build things, and they don't take the time to do the risk management. They don't take the time to do the estate planning. They don't do those things that you have to do to transfer those assets and to keep that legacy going. So what I would ask you is, what would your advice be to the 25 or 30-year-old son? What would your advice be to that 25 or 30-year-old son to keep that farm going? And how do you find time to do those things?
Well, you have to make time. We all have family dinners sitting around the table, and you just have to start the conversation and just tell them, Dad and Mom, I enjoy farming. I see myself doing this, this as my means of income for my family. And I have to know that there's some kind of stability. And, my dad pushed me when I was in college to go off and get another job away from the farm. And I encourage other farm kids to do that too. At least 2 to 5 years away from the farm, so that you don't get in the mindset of, well, this is the way my dad did it and his dad before him. You can see the out of the box. I worked for a corporate farming business. And so I learned about cash conversion cycles, and I learned about the importance of budgeting, and maybe it's taking a step back and saying, well, yeah, my grandfather and my dad have always grown wheat. Well, maybe we're not making money in wheat. Maybe we need to switch over and grow something different. Get into a specialty hay crop or anything, and reevaluate, and not maintain the status quo, knowing that change is not a bad thing, and change can be good for growth. So, and also I'm 32 now. I've been back farming with my dad for 5 years, and I farmed with him before I went to college. But, also working away from the farm, it establishes your worth, your value. It gives you a personal, shows your dad or your farm, whether it's your dad or mom, that you have, this is my value. This is what I bring to the table. I'm more than just a tractor driver. I'm more than just just wrenching on machines. That I want to be in ownership. I want to take responsibility, and you can feel that I can take on that responsibility. And it's almost it gives you that farm, that future farmer, some leverage. It shows, Dad, I want to come back and farm with you, but I have this other path. And you almost have to have that discussion before you come back to the farm, when you have a little more leverage. And I don't want it to sound like, but it's a relationship, and you have to let them know that I have a value, and I have to look out for my family, as well as your farm and the business and what you've established. But I need some guarantees. I need some promises that there's going to be something here for me, and that we can have a smooth transition to the next generation. And then that gets back to, if you have siblings, there's passive members of a business and there's active members of a business. And someone who's active and working on the farm, I'm not saying that they deserve more in an inheritance or a step down from the farm, but that farm can't be split. And this is the way they used to do it back in Europe. My family, when my grandfather immigrated to the United States from Switzerland, he wasn't the oldest son. And back in Europe, the oldest son got the business. They got the farm. And it sounds cruel and it sounds terrible, but they did it that way because if they split and divided the business too many ways, it wouldn't be sustainable. So they would tell the other daughters and sons, go off, get married, have a family, join the army, immigrate to the United States and start a business for yourself. And that sounds rough and mean to us now in this day of equality and fairness. But, you have to, the business has to take precedence, because you can have all the meaning in the world that I want this farm to be split up to all my children equally. But if it gets divided so poorly that it can't be sustainable, then no one has anything. So there are ways, like I said, that farm can continue to be profitable for the entire family. But that 20 or 30-year-old young man that wants to come back to the farm, he needs to have that talk almost before you come back and you start farming. And if you're already back farming, you still need to have that talk. You need to sit down and discuss and just open lines of communication and say, hey, maybe we should go see an estate lawyer. We should get some legal advice, because you can get into trouble when you start passing things on to kids. I mean, you want to, like I said before about the step down basis. When a son or a daughter inherits from a parent, they can get a step down basis. So that means the property tax remains the same. They don't have to get it reappraised and start paying some of these farms that have been owned for 4 generations, the property tax can be fairly low. Well, now the value of the property has gone up, huge amounts. And if you did a transfer prior to death, prior to inheritance, then you have to get a stepped up basis, which can be a huge hit. A lot of farming areas have the Williamson Act and different things that help protect you on the property tax side. But that's just one example of where I think it's very important to get legal advice. And then also when you have that third party that's giving you advice, we all don't want to sound greedy. We don't want to sound like we're going to our parents like, give me, I want it all. But, that lawyer can tell you, this, if you don't want a dispute to happen later where lawyers end up with everything, or you don't want the government to end up with everything, you want to be able to continue and pass as much of your business and your legacy to the next generation, then these are the steps you should do. And like for my family farm, we divided the land up between the 3 siblings. We separated the farm business on one side and the land on another side. Because the farm owns machinery and equipment and shops and hay barns and things such as that. But a lot of the value lies in the land. So we set up the land into separate LLCs, land holding companies for each one of my siblings and myself. And now the farm rents from those LLCs. The LLCs make the land payments and the property tax payments, and the farm pays rent to those LLCs, and they're able to, make those payments.
Now, this is a little bit of a personal question here. Are those fair market rental rates, or is that something that you work out?
Well, it kind of depends on each LLC. So how much debt load they have, there's some finagling there based on what has a higher debt load versus the others. And then, another benefit, that me and my siblings have seen, those LLCs have made income. And I've taken, my assets in my LLC and I've borrowed against them to buy more ground. And my brother, he works for a farming company, doesn't have an interest in coming back. He's a passive partner. And at this time, he doesn't have an interest in coming back to the farm. So he's taking his income from his, and he's going to go and try and buy some commercial real estate, and kind of diversify. So, it's kind of the freedom. And this is while my dad is still in his 50s and he's working and he's actively involved. But we're taking these assets that are in the farm plan and in the business, and we're using them to continue to expand and grow our legacy.
You just mentioned a farm plan. Is that a written document?
My dad has a will, written out will,
right.
That, has his desires, and each LLC has bylaws,
Right.
that show who's the manager and who has control, and and there is a written out plan, but not, in between different legal documents.
So what you're saying is you have those managerial structures outlined.
Right.
When you go to your banker, they're going to ask about your business structures, and you can say, here, this is what we have in mind. This is how we're doing it. And it's something written down.
Right.
The other thought process here is what you're talking about is expensive.
Yeah. LLCs typically cost about $800 a year, just kind of in.
That's having somebody else manage.
That's just for tax tax prep, and so there is a cost.
Mm-hmm.
So this is probably only for a certain size operation. And LLCs were originally designed for liability control. So kind of the general jargon is for each $1 million of assets, you need one LLC. That's kind of the general rule of thumb. And when you own, let's say my brother purchases commercial property and God forbid some kid got hurt on that commercial property, you don't want them to come back and sue and rob the farm, right? So it's there are ways of dividing things and separating things, and kind of a little bit of separation. The other thing, and just a side benefit of these LLCs, unfortunately, we're in a time period where a lot of marriages aren't lasting. And a thing like divorce can destroy a business.
That gets back to that idea of splitting that asset in half and it's no longer viable.
Right. And by putting the farm ground in these LLCs, that's sole inherited property. Now, if you commingle those funds and those assets, then that's a different story. But there is some, strong belief that, splitting things up in different ways kind of gives you a little bit of protection. And no one wants to, when you marry the love of your life, and I'm very happily married and I love my wife. No one wants to think about divorce, but, I think in California, upwards of 60% of marriages end in divorce. And what's the old, I think there's a song, if marriage was a plane, nobody would get on.
Right. That would be a Brad Paisley song. I know exactly which one you're referencing.
Yep, exactly. There it is.
What I want to add to this conversation is living trust structures. And I'm by no means a legal expert, and I can't tout the benefits of one over the other, but what I can do is give somebody the vocabulary to ask the questions. Those living trusts function in a similar asset isolation function to that LLC. So that might be another tool available to a producer looking to transfer assets or separate assets and maintain that heritage.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a farmer. I'm by no means a legal expert.
Right. What I'm trying to do with that introduction there is give somebody the vocabulary to start Googling. If they say, well, I don't have $1 million in assets, maybe that LLC doesn't make sense to me, or that $800 a year is outside of reality, just something else. And
yeah, no, absolutely.
But to hear from you who's done this, I truly hope it inspires somebody.
Yeah, and I don't want to come off as brash, and I definitely makes me a little nervous talking about all these numbers and things, but there's definitely a lot of farmers in this situation, and to some smaller farmers, $1 million is going to sound like a lot, but when you have generational farms, it gets to these points very quickly. And I've seen plenty of farms with a net worth of upwards of 15 million that make no money year after year. And pretty soon they're having auctions and they're selling off assets, and, just owning all these things and having all this, you still have to manage a farm. You still have to, my dad likes to say, worry about the pennies and the dollars will take care of themselves. It's just continuing to manage your farm and all the different hats that a farmer wears. We're welders and fabricators, we're mechanics, we're agronomists. Now we have to be politicians and regulatory, advisors with all these new regulations coming down, especially in places like California. We have to be accountants and HR managers. We have to be, you name it. We wear so many different hats on a farming operation. You're never going to be an expert in everything, but you need to know enough about everything that you don't get taken advantage of.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Nice to talk with you, John.